He tried to lure me into the bathroom. This just happened to me a few nights ago, and I'm still shaken up, so bear with me. I am a female bartender at a small cafe that doubles as a venue. During the day, we serve coffee and lunch, and at night, we have a full bar with bands, comedy shows, etc. On this night, there was an open mic comedy show. Not a lot of comedians showed up, so we ended up closing up shop early, and I was ready to go home. I had a patron come in and order a single beer during the comedy show. He was acting nervous, but being a female bartender, I get male customers that are shy or don't want to talk to women, so I didn't really think much about it. He sat down, sipped his beer, and watched the show. Since we closed early, everyone was pretty much gone, and I wanted to lock up and clean so I could get home. After I escorted the last couple out of the bar and got ready to lock the door, I see the man from earlier walk down the back hallway and into the men's restroom. Not even a minute later, he burst through the door yelling, "Hurry! Come back here! I need help!" I stood at the opposite end of the hallway and asked him what was wrong. "The toilet is overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Help me! Help me clean this up." I could tell that something was wrong, and I replied, "It's okay, man. It happens. I'll mop it up. I'm just trying to close up right now." He continued to argue with me, trying to get me to come into the bathroom with him as I stood about 20 feet away down the hallway. Finally, he walks towards me very aggressively and tries to grab my arm. "You need to come back here now," he says. I immediately put my hands out in front of me so he cannot come any closer, and I tell him he has to leave. He walks outside and I lock the door behind him. I check the bathroom and it's completely spotless, no water on the floor at all. I flush the toilet and urinal, and they were both working fine. I start to get nervous, and I take my large pocket knife out and clip it to the waistband of my pants, just in case. As I'm cleaning our espresso machine and putting toppers on the liquor bottles, I hear a tapping noise. I look up at the front of the store, which is one big window that has a few curtains covering it. The same man is tapping on the window, waving at me and laughing like a maniac. I watch him walk over to the door and pull on it. It doesn't open since I locked it after he left. He starts screaming and pounding on the glass, saying, "Open the fucking door, I'm going to fucking kill you." Fight overcame flight at this point, and I walked around the counter, and about 6 feet from the door, I pulled out my knife and locked eyes with him and yelled, "I'm calling the cops, get the fuck out of here." He smiled and walked out of view of the window. At this point, all my adrenaline just crashed. I locked myself in the office and called 911, crying, explaining that I'm alone, and a man tried to lure me into the bathroom and was outside trying to get into my bar. I waited an hour and a half. No police showed up. I called my boyfriend and he drove up to the shop. My manager watched the security cameras from home, making sure that the man didn't come back. I did the deposit and immediately drove home, my boyfriend following close behind me. My male busboy has been coming in to work with me, so I'm not alone. And the managers have been keeping an eye on the security cameras while I'm working. So, crazy dude who tried to lure me into the bathroom to do no God knows what to me. Let's not meet. Do you like your pussy eaten? I was working at a bar and had finished my shift a bit tipsy. I sat down outside in the smoking area with a bunch of regulars and started feasting on a cocktail with my cigarette. It was still early on a Friday night, and one of the regulars started chatting me up. He's a large guy in his mid-40s, has a soggy mustache and a receding hairline. Told me what a nice girl I was, that we should be friends, that he liked me. I told him pretty much the same thing back, being a good bartender and all that. That's when he leans in and asked me, "But Chica, Do you like getting your pussy eaten? I sat aback for a while, but answered truthfully that I think it can be quite nice foreplay, but rarely good enough to make me come. He replies, "You haven't tried me, baby." And I tell him I never will. This is where he tells me I won't have any choice in the matter. He'll hold me down while he eats me out. He charades it for me even repeatedly. Shows me the chokehold he'll use and pretends to eat my pussy like an apple, devour it. This goes on for a while, with him acting out his imagined scenario, and me repeatedly telling him that there is no chance in hell I'm letting him anywhere near my genitals. At some point, I get frustrated enough to bang my fist into the table and demand that he stops talking about devouring my pussy. This is, of course, where the whole smoking area turns to look at us. Creep just smiles, winks at me, and says, "You started, honey." Compelling argument for unemployment. About 2 years ago, I was a bartender at a local chain restaurant. Now, being a bartender, in my opinion, kinda sucks balls. I'm a bit socially awkward, and the place I live harbors a decent amount of drunk scumbags. Not to mention, we are right behind a courthouse, so any day shift is spent listening to people make bitter jokes about divorce, or loudly exclaim how domestic disturbances aren't that big of a deal. It's extremely ridiculously awkward. One regular, Tim, would come in about 3 times a week to order burgers and iced teas. He's been fairly nice and non-invasive for as long as I'd known him, so serving him was not a bother. However, as a Harry Potter fan, I must point out that he looked like a real-life, non-robe-wearing Voldemort. Seriously, spiky teeth, super pale, high-pitched voice, the works. So, Tim came in one day for his usual burger and tea, but this week decided to finish with some dessert. This dessert came with white maple dipping sauce. Looks like man juice. I brought him his dessert, and he turned to me and said, "Any ideas what I can do with this sauce?" I replied sarcastically, "I'm pretty sure most people put it on the brownie." His response made me want to vomit. "I'd rather take my sauce and drown you in it." Completely grossed out, I looked at him and very clearly stated that I was uncomfortable with him saying things like that. He quickly left. 2 days later, he comes in again. This time, he grabs my arm while I'm serving food to another table and whispers, "I meant what I said, even if you aren't into it." I shook him off and went straight to my manager, told her the situation, and asked for her help. I was told that for some reason, I make all of our regulars into creeps, and that I wasn't allowed to be rude to him. Seriously? That's awesome. A win for corporate establishment. Tim came back 2 or 3 more times the next week, all on shifts that I worked. He would awkwardly stare at me, make nasty noises when I turned my back on him, I'm assuming at my ass, make gross sexual comments towards me, and just generally creep me out. I wasn't sure at this point if I should say anything, but it was getting to the point where I did not want to go back to work. Not to mention, my manager were doing nothing in all of this. So, finally I tell my boyfriend John about all of this, and he's livid. He tells me that the next time Tim comes in, to call him. Of course, 3 days later, Tim rambles in. Immediately, I call John. He hauled ass to the restaurant, getting there in what seemed like seconds. Tim seems to notice that John was not a patron the minute that he walked in. John sat at the bar, kissed me on the cheek, and refused all form of food or drink while staring ice grenades into that man. Tim finished eating quickly and walked to the parking lot. John calmly followed him out, balling his fist the entire way. Looking out the window, all I saw was John walking towards Tim furiously, pointing and hand gesturing while yelling, and Tim backing away hurriedly towards his car. he left in a flash, and I have never seen him again. I had a fantasy that I kidnapped you and kept you forever. I have this close friend, Jack, who relayed to me a pretty terrifying tale of something that happened to his friend a long time ago. My mentor, Jack, is now a retired former HR community college guy in his mid-60s. 30 years ago, however, Jack was working as a bartender in a bar in Portland's gay community. That's how Jack met Randy. Randy was a good-looking, well-spoken customer in his mid-20s, pretty attractive 80s preppy type. Randy lived close to Jack, and the two went on a couple of dates for a few weeks. Randy was relatively new to Portland, having moved there a few years ago after his parents in small-town Connecticut flipped out about him being gay and trying to commit him to an institution. They were dating casually, but Jack was shocked when he discovered that this clean-shaven college graduate was working the streets of Portland as a hustler. You see, while we think of Portland as being a hipster haven now, back in the 1980s, there were a lot of seedy elements to the town, and that included the gay underground prostitution scene. The revelation about Randy's career happened this way. Randy called Jack one night and asked him if he could come over. He showed up at Jack's apartment pretty upset. Randy confessed to Jack that he was a prostitute, and then relayed a wild tale about something that had happened to him the night before with a client. He refused to name who it was, but told Jack it was a very prominent local businessman, someone that was very high profile in the mid-80s Portland. The client was into S&M and bondage stuff, and Randy had seen him about once a month for a year. The previous night, after they concluded their scene, the client said to Randy, "I had a fantasy that I kidnapped you and kept you forever." He asked Randy if he wanted to stay with him. Of course, Randy said no way, and the guy got angry. The chauffeur drove Randy home, which was, in hindsight, a huge mistake. The client now knew where he lived. Earlier that evening, Randy was headed home, but before he got to his apartment, Randy noticed his client's limo parked down the street from his building. Randy noped the fuck out of there and ate dinner somewhere else. But when he went home, the limo was still there with the chauffeur sitting in the car. That's when he decided to go over to Jack's place and confess everything. Randy was completely terrified now. He tried to laugh it off as a dumb joke, but the fact that the chauffeur had spent hours parked in the same spot a few blocks from his apartment building was scary as hell. Randy begged if he could stay at Jack's place for a few days so this could die down, even though Jack was totally surprised and pretty confused about all of this. He let him stay at his place until a few days later, Randy called him at work and told Jack he decided to go back to his apartment. Randy said he called Jack later in the week about a movie they were planning to see that weekend. Jack never heard from him again. When Jack went to his apartment building a few days later to check on Randy, the building manager said that Randy had moved out. After that, there wasn't much Jack could do. Randy didn't tell him who the guy was, and he didn't know much about Randy's background, except for some vague idea of where he came from, and this was, again, the 80s. The policemen were not gonna make a big deal about some male prostitute that went missing. Jack kept hoping he'd get a call from Randy at some exotic locale, but as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years, and years turned into a quarter century, he stopped expecting the call. Hopefully Randy just skipped town. Maybe he ran all the way back to Connecticut, found some sympathetic family member who helped him get back on his feet, and he's put all this behind him, and he's just some regular 50-something-year-old guy with a regular career and regular concerns. Or maybe he's not. And Jack will never know. He smells like garbage. He knows where I sleep. He wants to eat me. I was working at a sports bar in the morning, and a big, dirty fella sat down in my section. He had shoulder-length wild hair and dirty, torn clothing. You know, typical loony garb. But I'm a good waitress. I don't plan on treating him any different than any other customer. So I greet him, and I'm instantly hit with the smell of garbage. I grew up neglected and abused, which is important for a few reasons, some of which comes into play later. 1. I know what it's like to be judged, and I empathize and overcompensate when I deal with someone I think who has also been wrongly judged. 2. My parents were creepy hoarders, so the smell of garbage and BO together especially, gives me anxiety attacks. 3. Because of the abuse and some other trauma, I have severe PTSD. This sports bar was the last job I was able to hold, which means I'm always on high alert and hypersensitive to my surroundings and possible threats. I think in terms of defense always, especially concerning my home, so even though the smell of this man was skyrocketing my anxiety, I treated him well. I figured he was down on his luck. He came in on all-you-can-eat taco bar day and stayed for 5 hours, and I figured he hadn't eaten much lately, which struck a personal chord with me, because our parents didn't feed us, and we often went days without food. I felt so sorry for him, so I went above and beyond when serving him. He obviously appreciated it, and he left. Nothing unusual. He returned the next week and requested me. This time, he had brought some emails he printed out between him and his ex, and asked me if I could read them and explain some of the things his ex had said since I was a girl. I told him I would read it when I wasn't working, and I took him and shoved him in my purse. From the emails, I could see his name was Steve. He later asked what days and shifts I worked, and I lied through my teeth. He started asking other personal questions too, and honestly, I am used to this. I mean, being a girl and working at a bar. I've been waiting tables for 8 years at this point, and has dealt with a fair bit of creepers. So, I have a whole fabricated life story on deck designed to deter any funny business. I remember that the only true thing I ever told him was that my sister worked at Subway, and I accidentally mentioned her name. I remember vividly, because I had a very strong gut feeling that I shouldn't say it. I wish I had listened to that feeling. A week later, during one of my night shifts, Steve comes in and he was pissed. He demanded to know why I wasn't working when I said I was. I said I had traded a lot of shifts recently. Steve got super close to me and exclaimed that I better be here next time, and he left. A cook told me that he had seen that guy sleeping in his car in the parking lot that morning, and that he had seen the same car parked in the lot several times when he left at night. He knows it was the same car because it was filled with trash. Steve came back in after last call and told me he wanted to place an order, but I said it was too late, so he went to the bathroom. I watched for him to leave, and he never did. At this point, I was about to have a panic attack. I told the manager what was going on, and him and the bouncer found him standing on the toilet in the stall. They dragged him out and told him he could never come back. I told my boyfriend, so when he picked me up, he brought 2 friends, and I discreetly hid my face and disguised myself when I left, checking the mirrors to see if we were being followed. Steve never came back. and I ended up quitting shortly after anyways. Eventually, my boyfriend and I broke up, and I kept our apartment and had my sister move in. A few months later, things took a turn for the worst. I started dating my girlfriend, who is from a small town, and she wanted to take a weekend trip back home. When we got back, one of the window panes was busted in a multiple pane window, and I asked my sister about it, and she hadn't noticed. She hadn't left the house all weekend, and she didn't hear glass breaking or anything suspicious. This did not feel like a break-in attempt, and the more we thought about it, the scarier it became. Number one, we were dead broke. There's nothing. You couldn't get any money from inside. Trust me, I've tried. And it's evident no matter what window you look in from. Like I said, I think defense, so all the windows have blinds, but there are a few gaps in them from the cats. I have looked through these gaps multiple times to be completely aware of what can and cannot be seen. Also, I put long screws in all the window frames, so they can't be opened more than 4 to 6 inches. 2. The window pane was pried out, not busted in, meaning that they knew someone was home, and they didn't want to be heard. 3. It was the only night in over a year that I left town. I didn't put it on Facebook, and I only told a few good friends. Neither my sister and I have cars, so you can't look in the driveway and see who's home. The next night, we heard the neighbor's dog barking and growling, and we heard footsteps in the yard. I grabbed a gun, went to the living room next to the yard and listened, thinking to myself, be smart. Is this 2 feet or 4? And the second I realized it was bipedal, I started flipping the lights on and off rhythmically to make the person think we were signaling our neighbor. That made him leave. Sign 4, it wasn't a break-in attempt. You don't return to the house you failed to break into the day before. My sister and I got tasers and WAP spray. Because I don't have a CNC and my sister won't touch a gun. The rest of the week was quiet, and my sister was now armed. So that weekend, my girlfriend and I decided to go out now. We got in a stupid fight that night, and when she dropped me off, I threw $20 in her car and said something snarky like, here's my half of the tab, and went inside. She noticed when she was a few blocks away and texted she was going to come give it back to me, but I told her not to. She knocked, but I didn't want to answer because I was mad. I heard footsteps come up to my bedroom window, and I waited for her to knock the window so I could yell at her and tell her not to come back anymore, but she just walked off. She said she texted to say she tucked the $20 in the screen door, so I got up to grab it and there was nothing there. I told her it wasn't there and asked if it could have fallen out, and it wasn't possible. Then I asked why she walked to my window, and she said she hadn't. This meant whoever saw her leave, the money had to be 50 feet or less from the window. It had only been 3 minutes tops from when she dropped it off to when I checked, and the only place that could have been was in our backyard. It also means whoever walked up to my window knew my girlfriend was there to see me, and knew which room was mine. A few weeks later, we heard footsteps in the yard again. I did the same routine, grabbed the gun, stood in the living room, then started with the lights. Then I had an idea. The person needs to think they can be seen, so I started to flip the switch every time I heard a step. Once they noticed, they started running, so I ran to look out the people to see a big fella with wild hair running down the alley. Even though I didn't get a great look, the general outline looked like Steve. So I started looking for the emails he gave me. Like I said, I'm always on high alert, and he raised concern. The second I noticed his full name was on the emails, I decided I was going to keep them. I get his last name and searched his public record. Then I pulled up his most recent mugshot and asked my sister if she had seen the man before, and her face went ghost white. She said yes. He smelled like garbage, and that made her anxious too. He came into her job, Subway, a few times, but every time he came in, he just asked her a lot of weird questions. She said she'll never forget the creepy, menacing smile he plastered on his face the second she told him her name, and the feeling of pure fear it gave her. She rides her bike to and from work, and I'm betting he followed her home. One thing became painfully clear. He didn't hurt my girlfriend when she left the money. He didn't touch my sister when she rode her bike home. This was about me. The second she told me this, I called the cops. I gave them the emails and told them everything I knew, down to the name of the cook I knew could describe his car. They found his car within a week. It was abandoned by the lake. It was full of trash, a few personal belongings, and pages on pages of his crazy thoughts and intentions. There were hundreds of pages about me, and what he thought he knew about me, my sister, a checklist of all the subways he checked to find her, what he learned from her, the layout of our house, my girlfriend's information, and the most fucked up, his very sexually charged plan to keep me alive while he cut me up and ate me. The plan was to break in, kill my sister, and wait for me to come home. Then he was going to cut off a piece of me a day and make me watch while he ate it and jerked off. In less than 24 hours, the cops found his body in the lake. I had PTSD before this happened, so did my sister, and this event made it so much worse for us. My sister can't work either now, and we are both in the disability process. I debated posting this for a long time. I don't like thinking and talking about it, and it gives me panic attacks sometimes. It literally has taken me 6 hours to write it all out, but I decided it's a story worth telling. I'll never get over it if I keep avoiding it, and maybe, hopefully, it'll help save someone else's life. So be kind with the comments. Thanks for reading.